The desert doesn't forgive. It doesn't hurry, it doesn't care, and it never forgets. When the sun dips low and the horizon glows like iron pulled from a blacksmith's fire, the world feels older than time. Shadows stretch across the land, long and sharp, like knives laid flat against the sand. The wind moves slow here, dragging grains of dust that glitter for a heartbeat in the dying light, only to vanish into silence again. And in that silence rides a man. His horse moves steady, hooves sinking deep with every step. Each dull thud carries in the stillness, echoing longer than it should, as if the earth itself remembers every sound a rider leaves behind. The saddle leather creaks, the stirrups clink faintly, and every so often the horse exhales in a low, tired huff that curls white in the cooling air. The man on its back, he doesn't speak. He hasn't spoken in days. A wide-brimmed hat shadows his face, but the lines around his mouth tell a story of years spent grinding against stone. His coat, once rich with black dye, is a ghost of its former self. Faded gray, frayed at the cuffs, dust ground so deep into the seams, it's become part of the fabric. A rifle rides across his back, a revolver at his hip, but no one who's ever looked into his eyes would say those were the deadliest things he carried. Because his eyes are the kind that don't see the world in front of him anymore. They stare at things behind him, things only he knows, faces he can't wash away, voices that don't stop whispering when he closes his eyes at night. Every man who's lived long enough in the desert carries regrets, but this man, carries them like chains, and the sound of those chains is silence. For 3 days he's ridden with nothing but that silence. No towns, no campfires but his own, no conversation but the creak of leather and the whisper of wind. He doesn't drink to forget, he doesn't pray to ease the weight. He just keeps moving, 1 mile after another, as though the land itself demands he wear his penance down into the dirt. Now and then he passes signs of life. A crow perched on a fence post that hasn't seen a rider in years. A coyote watching from the ridgeline, yellow eyes gleaming like lanterns. Bones half buried in sand, the remains of some animal that couldn't keep pace with this land's cruelty. He sees them all, and he sees himself in each. The crow, alone. The coyote, hungry. The bones, forgotten. He tightens his grip on the reins, not because the horse falters, not because he fears the desert, but because the weight inside him stirs at every reminder of what he's become. Once, long ago, he'd been different. He remembers, though he tries not to. There'd been laughter once, warm nights spent beside someone who looked at him without fear. There'd been a boy, too, small hands reaching up, trusting him, needing him. But those days are ash now, burned out, and every mile he rides is a mile away from who he used to be. The sky deepens. The sun folds itself behind the jagged teeth of distant mesas. A bruise-colored twilight spreads across the desert, and stars prick the heavens, faint at first, then burning brighter with each breath. He pulls his horse to a slow stop on a ridge. From here, the world stretches endless. Empty valleys yawning below, mountains black as grave markers in the distance. The air is sharp now, carrying the bite of cold that only the desert night can conjure. He lifts his head, staring into that vast, merciless horizon. And for just a moment, he whispers, so low, even the wind seems to lean in. Forgive me. It isn't clear who he's speaking to. The woman whose grave he never visits, the boy whose face he hasn't seen in years, or himself, for still breathing when so much of him died long ago. The desert doesn't answer. It never does. So he exhales, adjusts his hat, and nudges the horse forward, back into silence, back into regret. But fate doesn't leave a man to rot forever, and tonight, as the stars sharpen overhead, something waits for him in the shadows ahead, something that will break his silence wide open. The horse's ears twitched first.
not the man's. He'd learned long ago that animals know the desert better than men ever will. And when a horse pricks its ears toward the rocks and snorts, that's not nothing. That's warning. The rider eased back on the reins, the animal slowed, hooves dragging dust, and the night fell thick around him. At first he thought it was just the wind. The canyon breathed like it always did, low, hollow sighs through cracks in the stone. But then it came again. Not the wind, not an animal. A cough. Thin. Fragile. The kind of cough you only hear from lungs too young or too weak to fight. The rider's eyes narrowed. His hand, almost by instinct, brushed the revolver on his hip. This land had tricks. Bandits sometimes used decoys, fake cries, the voice of a child, even a woman's scream, to lure men in close. He knew that game. Knew it too well. But something in that sound, it wasn't staged. It was too raw, too cracked at the edges. He slid out of the saddle, boots kissing dirt with a soft thud. The spurs at his heels chimed once, then went still. His hand stayed close to the revolver, but his movements were slow, deliberate, careful. The desert was watching, and whatever was hidden among those rocks was watching too. He stepped closer. Gravel crunched underfoot. A crow shrieked somewhere in the dark as if trying to call him back. Then he saw her. A child. Curled against a boulder, small knees drawn tight to her chest. Her hair was tangled, matted with dust and sweat. Her dress, once white maybe, was torn and streaked with brown earth. Her feet were bare, blistered and cut from miles of running. In her arms, she held a doll, if you could still call it that. One arm missing, the fabric torn at the seams, its once bright face rubbed blank by years of clutching. She gripped it tight, the way a drowning soul grips driftwood. Her lips were cracked, her breath shallow, but it was her eyes that froze him where he stood. Big, wide, too wide. Eyes that had seen things no child should. Eyes that carried the weight of fear, of loss, of something worse than hunger. For a long moment neither moved. The desert itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what this man would do. Finally his voice broke the silence. Low, graveled. "You out here alone, little one?" She didn't answer, not at first. Her hands clutched the doll tighter, knuckles white. Her lips parted but no sound came, just a dry rasp of air. The rider crouched, slow enough to show he meant no harm, but far enough that he didn't crowd her. Dust swirled around his boots, carried by the faint night breeze. Again he asked, "You alone?" This time, she gave a single, sharp nod. That was it. No cry, no plea for help, just a nod. And in that nod he saw something that twisted his chest tighter than any bullet wound he'd ever taken. Because he knew that kind of silence. The silence of someone who'd learned not to expect kindness. The silence of someone who'd been let down too many times to waste words on hope. He could have turned back right then, climbed into the saddle, nudged his horse, and left her to the coyotes and the night. Lord knows he'd walked away from worse. And for a heartbeat, he almost did. Because helping meant caring, and caring meant remembering, and remembering meant reopening wounds he'd spent years trying to bury. But something in her eyes, those wide, watchful eyes, nailed his boots to the dirt. He reached for his canteen. The leather creaked under his grip as he pulled it free. He held it out toward her, arm steady, offering nothing but water. No speeches, no promises, just water. For a long second, she stared at it like it was a trick, like maybe if she reached for it, he'd snatch it back and laugh the way cruel men do. But her thirst was stronger than her fear. She reached out, trembling, small fingers brushing against the rough leather. The moment her lips touched the spout, she drank, deep, desperate swallows that shook her whole body. The sound of her gulping water echoed louder than gunfire in the still desert. When she pulled away, her eyes glistened, not with tears, but with something harder, a cautious spark. Trust doesn't come easy out here. But sometimes it begins with nothing more than water passed between strangers under the stars.
That night, the desert was colder than stone. The kind of cold that slips through your coat, crawls up your spine, and settles deep in the bones. The rider built a fire the way he always did, quietly, with practiced hands. A circle of stones, kindling stacked neat, sparks coaxed from flint until the flames caught and began to grow. Each movement was deliberate, precise. A man doesn't spend years in the wilderness without learning how to make light out of nothing. The girl sat across from him, knees pulled tight to her chest, her ragged doll pressed against her lips. She hadn't spoken a word since she drank from his canteen. Her eyes never left him, though, watchful, unblinking, like a cornered animal measuring whether the figure across the fire was hunter or shelter. The flames danced between them, throwing shadows that twisted across her face. She looked even smaller in the firelight, too small for the weight she carried in her silence. The rider didn't push her, didn't ask who she was, where she'd come from, or why she was alone in a land that killed grown men without mercy. He just opened a tin of beans, the metal lid scraping loud in the quiet night, and spooned half into a small tin plate. Without looking up, he pushed it across the dirt toward her. For a moment, she just stared. Her hands tightened on the doll, as though even food might be a trick. Then, slowly, she reached forward, fingers trembling, and pulled the plate into her lap. She ate in small, cautious bites, chewing like she'd forgotten what it was to eat without fear of someone tearing it away. The rider ate his share in silence. The only sounds were the crackle of the fire, the distant cry of a coyote, and the soft clink of spoons against tin. And then she spoke. Her voice was so quiet he almost missed it, a rasp, little more than a breath. "They took my mama." The rider's spoon froze halfway to his mouth. His eyes lifted. Across the fire, she stared at the flames, not him. Her small face glowed with orange light, and her lips pressed tight, as though forcing the words out cost more strength than she had. "Men. With guns. They came to our place. Said Mama owed money she didn't owe. She said no. They didn't care. They took her." Her voice cracked them, breaking like dry wood under pressure. She swallowed hard, clutching the doll so tight the fabric bunched between her fingers. "They said, if she can't pay, she'll work in the mines. And if she can't work..." The words died in her throat. She pressed her forehead against her knees, the doll crushed in her grip. The rider leaned back against a stone, his jaw set hard. He knew the story, not hers, but the pattern. He'd heard whispers in saloons, seen faces vanish from towns, watched good folk disappear while the law turned its eyes away. Death, they called it. Business. But he knew the truth. Chains dressed up in words. The girl stayed curled, silent again. But her silence wasn't empty anymore. It was loud, filled with every unspoken fear in her chest. The rider's gaze dropped to the fire. Its heat licked his skin, but inside he was colder than the desert night, because her words stirred something in him he'd buried deep. Once long ago there had been a woman, too. She trusted him, believed in him, and when the night came, when bullets found her, he hadn't been there. He'd been riding in the opposite direction, chasing coin, chasing pride. The desert had buried her voice, but it never buried his guilt. That wound had never closed. And now here was this child, carrying her own wound, bleeding out in silence across a fire he'd built. He closed his eyes, For the first time in years, his chest ached with something more than regret. It ached with the weight of choice. When he opened them again, his gaze found her small, trembling form. He didn't speak comfort, didn't make promises. Words were cheap, and he had no right to them. Instead, he reached across the fire, not toward her, but toward her plate, still half full. He nudged it gently closer, like a father would for a child who'd forgotten to eat. She lifted her head just enough to see. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Instead, she nodded, barely, almost invisible, and picked up the spoon again. It was nothing, just food, just a gesture. But in that moment, under the endless desert sky, it was everything. The fire burned lower. Stars scattered bright above, endless and cold. She finished eating, then curled onto the dirt, her doll still tight in a grip. Her breaths grew steady, softer, until sleep claimed her. The rider stayed awake, watching the fire fade to embers, listening to the desert's silence wrap around them both. And for the first time in years, that silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like a promise.
The sun rose slow the next morning, spilling pale gold across the desert like a painter too tired to finish his work. The rider woke first. He always did. Sleep was something he carried lightly, never deep, never long. He stirred the ashes of the fire, poured the last of the coffee grounds into a dented tin cup, and let the silence settle heavy around him. When he turned, the girl was sitting up, clutching her doll, hair tangled, eyes still swollen from a night of tears. She didn't speak, but she watched. And in her watchfulness there was something he recognized. Caution, mistrust, the kind that doesn't fade with one meal or one fire. He saddled his horse slow, every strap pulled snug, every buckle checked twice. The girl followed him with her eyes, and when the horse stamped its hoof, restless, she flinched. He caught it, didn't say a word, just paused long enough for her to steady herself again. When the horse was ready, he looked at her. Not hard, not soft, just steady. "You can ride," he said, voice gravel, low. Her lips pressed together. She nodded once, quick, though her hands trembled as she rose. He lifted her up, gentle but firm, and set her on the saddle before him. She clutched the horn tight, the doll pinned between her chest and the leather. Then he swung up behind her. The horse shifted, snorting, and the desert opened wide before them. They rode. The land stretched endless, dust plains broken by scattered sagebrush, rocks jagged like broken teeth, the horizon wavering under heat that hadn't even reached its worst yet. Hours passed. The only sounds were the horse's hooves against packed dirt, the creak of leather, the low rasp of wind. The girl said nothing. The rider said nothing. But silence isn't empty. It carries weight. Her head kept twitching, small, quick glances at him, then away, then back again, as if waiting for the moment he'd turn cruel, as men so often did. And every time, he didn't. He just kept his gaze fixed ahead, steady as the trail. By midday, her grip on the saddle loosened, not much, just enough for her shoulders to ease. By late afternoon, when the horse slowed for water at a narrow creek, she slid down without waiting for him, her boots crunching against the stones. She knelt by the water, splashing her face, sipping carefully. And when she looked back, he was watching. Her eyes narrowed. "What?" The rider's face didn't move, but his voice came rough as gravel. "Drink slow, or it'll make you sick." She hesitated, then obeyed, sipping small, measured gulps. It was nothing, just advice, just words. But to her it was something else. A man seeing her, not using her,
not ignoring her, just seeing. They rode again. As the sun dipped, bleeding orange across the horizon, the girl spoke the first time since dawn. "What's your name?" The rider's jaw tightened. His name was a weight he had carried too long, spoken in some towns with hate, in others with fear. A name tied to gunsmoke and graves. He looked out at the sinking sun. "Doesn't matter." She frowned, gripping her doll tighter. "Everybody's got a name." He didn't answer. The silence stretched long. Finally, her voice came softer, almost a whisper. "My mama called me Ruth." The rider's eyes flicked down at her, just a glance. Ruth. He let the name sit in the dust between them. Didn't say it back, but he remembered it, etched it deep, where things mattered. The night came fast, dragging cold over the desert. They camped again beneath a crooked mesquite tree. This time, Ruth didn't sit far. She sat close, her doll tucked safe in her lap, eyes half closed against the firelight. When the coyotes howled, she didn't curl into herself. She leaned slightly, just slightly, toward the rider's side. And though he didn't move, didn't shift, didn't reach, he let her. And in that small, wordless space, trust was born.
The desert doesn't keep secrets for long. By the third day, the trail was already whispering their presence. Hoofprints pressed into the sand, ashes from their fire still warm under the dirt. And men like the ones Ruth was running from, they knew how to follow. The rider felt it before he saw it. A shift in the wind, the silence too deep. That crawling itch between the shoulders, the kind a man learns not to ignore. He didn't tell the girl, just nudged the horse faster, eyes sweeping every ridge, every shadow. Ruth noticed anyway. Children always do. "You keep looking back," she said, clutching her doll tight. Her voice carried the brittle edge of someone who already knew what it meant when men chased. The rider's jaw flexed. "Because someone's following." She stiffened, her knuckles turned white around the doll's dress. "Is it them?" He didn't answer, which was answer enough. That night they camped near a canyon wall. The fire burned smaller, smoke thin and pale so it wouldn't be seen. The rider sat with his back against stone, revolver resting easy in his lap. His eyes never shut, though the girl's finally did, exhaustion pulling her under. Near midnight, the wind carried sound, distant, faint, but not the wild call of coyotes, not the restless shuffle of cattle. No, these were hoofs, horses, more than one. The rider's fingers curled around the revolver. He didn't move, didn't wake the girl, just listened, counted the rhythm of hoofs until they faded again. At dawn, he saddled the horse quicker than usual. "We ride hard today," he said. Ruth's eyes were wide, but she didn't complain. She just climbed up, the doll clutched to her chest. All day the desert bore down hotter, harsher. The horse labored under the strain, dust kicking up in clouds behind them. Every so often, the rider would glance back, always back. And once, just before dusk, he saw it. A flicker of movement, far on the ridge. Too far to make out faces, but close enough, he knew. They weren't alone. His stomach sank heavy. He'd seen that kind of pursuit before. The patience of wolves, men who didn't need to rush, just stalk and wait until their quarry wore down. By nightfall, Ruth's small voice broke the silence. "You gonna leave me with them?" The words hit like a knife. He pulled the reins, brought the horse to a stop, looked down at her, really looked. Her eyes weren't tearful now. They were hard, accusing. She'd been left before, too many times. The rider's voice came low, steady as stone. "No, not now, not ever." Her chin trembled, but she held his gaze, and in that moment she believed him. They camped once more, but this night was different. The rider set no fire. He sat with his back to the canyon wall again, but this time Ruth curled close against his side without hesitation. Above them, the stars burned cold and merciless, and somewhere beyond the dark, men were coming. The rider knew it wouldn't be long now. Soon the past he carried and the men chasing Ruth would collide on the same stretch of earth. And when it did, blood would follow.
By the fifth night, the chase was no longer in question. The men had closed the distance. You could feel it in the ground, in the way the horse grew restless, ears twitching at phantom sounds. At dawn, smoke trailed faint on the horizon. Not theirs, somebody else's. The rider knew what it meant. The hunters were close enough to stop, eat, laugh around a fire. Close enough to take their time because they were sure of the end. He chose the canyon. Narrow walls, one path through. A place where a single man might stand against many, if he was ready not to walk out. Ruth didn't understand at first. Why are we stopping? We can keep going. He shook his head. If we keep going, they catch us in the open. Here. He looked at the rocks, the shadows. Here I got a chance. Her lip trembled. A chance for what? He didn't answer, just crouched low, ran his hand over the dry sand, searching for the right ground to take a stand. By midday, they heard him. Laughter, boots against stone, the echo of horses clattering into the canyon mouth. The rider knelt in front of Ruth, placed a rough hand on her small shoulder. Listen to me. You stay behind that rock. Don't come out. Don't move, no matter what you hear. Her eyes brimmed with tears. But. No but. His voice cut sharp, then softened. You wanted to know if I'd leave you. I won't. But you gotta do your part. You gotta live. She swallowed hard, nodded, and clutched her doll so tight the fabric strained. The rider rose, revolver in one hand, rifle slung in the other. He stepped out into the open ground of the canyon, sunlight pouring down like judgment from heaven. Dust swirled around his boots, shadows stretched long behind him. He stood tall, waiting. The first outlaw rode into view, then another, then 5, 7, a whole pack, their faces burned by the sun, eyes mean and hungry. One of them spat in the dirt, smirking. Well, well, looks like we found ourselves a hero. The rider's jaw worked, but he said nothing. His silence was louder than their jeers. The leader dismounted, swaggered a few steps closer. You hand over the girl, old man. Might even let you walk out. The rider raised his rifle slow, steady. The click of the hammer echoed through the canyon. I don't walk with men like you. The outlaw's grin curled into a snarl. Then you don't walk at all. The first shot split the air, sharp, merciless. Then another. Chaos exploded. The rider moved like a storm, every shot deliberate. The crack of his rifle dropped the first man clean from his saddle. A revolver flashed in his left hand, firing into the dust, into the rush of boots and curses. Horses screamed, bullets sparked against stone. The canyon roared with gunfire. The rider took a hit across the arm, spun with the impact, but didn't falter. He dropped another man, then another. One outlaw charged close, knife flashing. The rider caught him with the rifle stock, a sickening crack of bone against steel, then finished him with cold precision. But numbers press hard. By the 4th minute, his breath was ragged, his body bleeding in places he couldn't afford to check. Still he fought. Not for himself,
for the girl hiding behind that rock, clutching her doll, eyes squeezed shut against the thunder of death. Finally, the canyon fell to silence. Dust hung heavy. The echoes of shots rolled away like thunderstorms breaking in the distance. Bodies lay scattered, motionless. The rider stood in the middle, swaying on his feet, smoke curling from his revolver. Only one outlaw still breathed, the leader, crawling through blood, hand reaching for a fallen pistol. The rider stepped forward, kicked the weapon away, and leveled his gun. The outlaw spat crimson. "She ain't worth dying for." The rider's eyes burned, voice low as gravel. "She's worth every bullet I had." One final shot. Silence claimed the canyon. The rider staggered back, dropped to one knee. His breath came harsh, blood soaking his shirt. But he was alive, and more importantly, so was she. "Ruth," his voice cracked, softer now. "It's over." She crawled from hiding, tears streaking her dust-stained face. She threw herself against him, arms tight around his neck, and for the first time in years, the rider let himself feel something other than regret. Not joy, not peace, but dignity. The knowledge that this time, at least, he hadn't failed.
The canyon stayed quiet long after the gun smoke cleared. Only the wind moved now, brushing over stone, carrying the smell of iron and dust. The rider sat slumped against a boulder, blood drying on his sleeve, hat tilted low. His chest rose and fell slow but steady. Ruth never let go of him. Her little arms clung around his neck as if loosening would mean losing him forever. He managed a faint smile, breath heavy. "You did good, kid. Stayed hidden. Did just what I asked." She pulled back, eyes wet but stubborn. "I was scared." "So was I," he admitted, voice rough as gravel. "But we got through." That honesty hung there, simple, unpolished, truer than anything else he could have said. They rode slow the next day, the horse careful with its burden. Ruth sat pressed against him, her head resting against his chest. Every jolt of pain reminded him he might not last forever, but every small heartbeat he felt against his ribs told him why he had to last a little longer. The land stretched wide again, gold plains under an endless blue. The scars of yesterday stayed behind, though he carried them in silence. By late afternoon, they saw smoke in the distance. Not outlaw smoke this time. Homestead smoke, thin, rising straight into the sky. Ruth's head lifted, her breath caught. That's Mama's place." Her voice cracked with mixture of hope and fear. The rider said nothing, just nudged the horse forward. As they drew near, a woman ran from the porch, hair unbound, apron flapping in the wind. Her cry split the still air. "Ruth!" Ruth scrambled down before the horse had even stopped, legs tangling in her haste. She ran, stumbling, then flew into her mother's arms. The rider stayed back, watching. The mother dropped to her knees in the dirt, clutching Ruth, sobbing so hard her shoulders shook. I thought I'd lost you forever." "I'm here, Mama. I'm here." The child's voice came muffled against her dress. The rider turned his gaze away. The sight was too raw, too much like something he had lost once and never found again. The woman finally looked up, eyes red, face streaked with tears. She saw him sitting tall on his horse, weary and blood-stained, shadowed against the sun. "Sir, I don't know your name, but," her voice broke, "you brought my baby home. I can never repay that." He tipped his hat, slow and respectful. "Don't reckon you need to. Just take care of her. That's payment enough." Ruth pulled from her mother, ran a few steps back toward him. "You're leaving?" "I got to," he said quietly. "A man like me,
He don't belong in places like this." Her lip trembled. She held up her ragged doll, offering it to him. "Then take her, so you remember." He froze. His throat tightened. After a moment, he reached down, took the doll gentle as glass, and nodded. "I'll remember." He turned the horse. The sun was sinking low, painting the horizon in fire and gold. Behind him, Ruth called out one last time, "What's your name?" He didn't look back, just let his voice carry on the wind. "Doesn't matter, kid. Just remember, don't let nobody ever take what's yours again." And with that, he rode on. The prairie swallowed him in long shadows, his figure shrinking against the vast land. Not a hero, not a saint, just a man who'd finally done one thing right. And though his road stretched lonely, something inside him was lighter, like the weight of regret had eased, replaced with a quiet dignity. For the first time in years, the silence riding with him was not his enemy, but his redemption.